We'll call the meeting to order of the Plymouth Charter Commission meeting live in the Great Hall on October 25th. Also available over Zoom if somebody wants to join us on the Zoom. This meeting is hybrid, meaning it's in person as well as via Zoom. If you're watching at home, you can see it on channel 47 of Verizon and channel 15 Comcast. This meeting is being recorded. The Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page of the town website. Any Zoom attendees that want to join in public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. And for the in-person audience for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. So there are just 4 of us live here tonight. I think there are 2 more members of the commission on Zoom, so there'll be a total of 6 participating. And if there are any votes, they'll be taken by roll call because of the Zoom component of the meeting. So let's start by Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We did think that perhaps we were going to have a student contingent of a couple of students here tonight. I think they will be coming to future meetings of the Charter Commission, but I did say that I would read this short letter that deals with their participation, which I think is a wonderful idea. This is about student liaisons to the Charter Commission. Plymouth, like many other towns, faces challenges when it comes to citizen participation in government. We rely on our residents to run for office and fill key roles on boards and committees. We encourage them to attend meetings. We provide comment for more effective legislation, and we implore them to go to the polls to make their voices heard on Election Day. But it's not enough to address only the voters of the present voters. We need to engage those of the future as well. In order to bring forward the next generation of town leaders, we need to convince them of the importance of town government. The best way to do this is through an informed and active student population. Only by showing the youth of our community how the town operates will they be in a position to assume the responsibility of continuing and improving its function. And in turn, by listening to the concerns of our future leaders, our current representatives can better understand the perspective of those who will eventually have to assume the mantle. Plymouth has already embraced youth participation in government through student liaisons to standing bodies such as the school board, and now the select board, and now the Charter Commission. But presently, before the town is one of the most significant issues it can face, and that's what we're doing here tonight, deciding the very form of government that these students will be called upon to manage. This is a seminal moment in town history, one that joins the events of the past with the prospects of the future. So what better opportunity for our next group of representatives to gain an appreciation of town government than by participating in the Charter Commission? This proposal is identical to that currently in operation for the school and the select boards. Now, 2 or 3 students will be chosen by the school, and they will attend each meeting. They will not vote, but they'll be able to participate in discussions and ask questions. I anticipate we would actually have them come up here and sit at the panel and participate in the discussion, the back and forth, as we begin to discuss the issues and what items we're going to be looking at to put into the charter. We're going to actually start that tonight. We always say the future of Plymouth is in its youth, so we should do everything in our power to educate, engage, and encourage them when it comes to town government. So I expect that a week from tonight, which is our next meeting on November 1st, next Monday, We may have a couple of student representatives, and they'll certainly be welcome. So this particular meeting, first let me ask if anybody has any changes to the agenda. So having seen that, we'll just plow right into it. And the two members of our commission meeting by Zoom are going to, of course, participate as well. So I ask that each of the members of the commission start getting down to the nitty-gritty and think of items which we could discuss as a group that would improve our local government here in Plymouth. And I'm suggesting that we form basically three categories. We'd have a category of green items, which would be items we all support and think they should be in a charter. And by the way, this is whatever form of government we end up with. These are items that would work in a town meeting charter, town council charter, and perhaps even in a mayor charter. But we think that they make sense for Plymouth. And so we'd have green items, and then there would be yellow items, which would be the ones we're still thinking about. They're not firmed up yet. We'd come back to them and discuss them, and at some point we decide whether or not to include them. And then there would be red items, which we all don't think really fit with Plymouth, and they would be rejected. We would ask Michelle to keep these lists of the green and the yellow items. We'd return to it from time to time, but they'd always be in our packet, and the list would grow and grow as we come up with more and more items to go into a charter here in Plymouth. And then I anticipate that right after the first of the year in 2022, we would begin to look at the items and start putting them together to form a charter. And then we'd have our draft ready in September of next year. Several of us have already come up with such a tentative beginning list. We're going to discuss some of those items tonight. Some I put on the agenda. Others were circulated to you in your packet, and as well as an email I sent for late arriving lists. So we have a lot of items to discuss as a commission to decide whether or not we want to include them in Plymouth. I think the key here is to keep track of of what we're doing, so that all our work is there for us to go back and keep checking. And I anticipate that starting in 2022, we'll have a good, solid, a lot of grist to formulate, to put into a charter, and we can start putting it together. So tonight is the first of these discussions, and I thought we would do this for an hour and 15 minutes or so, then we'd have public comment. It's on our agenda for 8:30. And then we would continue the discussion, and we'd also go into next week, the same sort of agenda for November 1st. So this is the list of just random things that have been proposed, but I tried to make the first list here sort of topical and things that we've just recently experienced. They kind of fit here in Plymouth because we've already just gone through it. So what better for the first item than the redistricting process, which we have just been through. And those of us, and many of you on the panel here participated, the working group, and sometimes it was thought to be chaotic and there wasn't a process, there was no procedure. So we're thinking of, what do you think? Should we have a redistricting process spelled out in the charter with definite roles and how it would be put together by the select board, participation by the committee of precinct chairs, a working group? In our review of all the charters, by the way, for the last couple of months, we've been reviewing charters from all over the Commonwealth. Each of us took 3 or 4 charters and have reviewed them in depth and found a lot of very interesting things in these other charters, the way they approach some of these problems, some of these issues. And sure enough, there was a charter that dealt with redistricting very, very efficiently. So that's the first question. Does that belong in our charter? Yes, Dave. Ms. Malgoody.
Before we get into discussion on this, let me just ask one question or make a statement or both.
Yep.
I'm going to depend on your experience, having been through many charter reviews, but our charter should be our governing document.
Right.
And when I looked through a lot of the comments that topics for discussion. There's some really good ideas, but I'm thinking that a lot of them don't belong in the charter. I don't think our charter should be bogged down with minutia. So, as we go through some of the things that have been suggested, I'm going to ask you with your experience to say, you know what, this really doesn't belong in the charter. So,
Well, this-
having said that,
Well, I think actually that's a question in itself to debate. I mean, having been through this, that's always a question, how much you want to put into the charter and how much you want to leave it to the bylaws. And I know there's two schools of thought. I mean, there's one school that thinks the charter should be, very bare minimal, like a constitution, just broad principles, but none of the, what you would call minutia. And then there's others that think that some of these specific items should be in the charter, that it's not going to get done. I have found over the years that the bylaws tend to be ignored and forgotten. At least getting it in the charter, and even that doesn't mean it's going to be followed, but at least putting it in the charter means it's more apt to be looked at and considered. But as we go along, there will be provisions that you'll say, okay, that shouldn't be in the charter. Let's just do that with a bylaw. So it's a judgment call.
Thank you.
You can go either way on it. Sometimes when things are really important, even though they seem small, we put it into the charter, and some of those provisions that are like that. So the question is whether redistricting belongs in the charter. The one thing I would offer here is that at least one town took the redistricting as a way to control the size of their town meeting. So I know there's been sentiment. In fact, the moderator actually reached out to me since town meeting and said that he's of a very strong view that we should not increase the number of town meeting members. And that's kind of a common theme. I think, David, you had that as one of your points. There's a concern that if we add precincts, we'll be adding town meeting members, and it becomes more unwieldy, and the moderator then has trouble giving everybody a chance to speak because there's so many of them. So there is, I know I've heard this around town, the sentiment that town meeting has grown about as big as it should, and that we should now perhaps even be looking to go the other direction. This one town charter had a provision that, in this particular case, they set the limit, town meeting members, at 240, which is way above what Plymouth has, but they have 240 town meeting members, and it's been that way now for decades. And they add precincts, and each time the town grows and they add precincts, they do the math so that it still has to come out at 240 town meeting members. That never changes, it stays exactly the same. And they do it by just going up and down the number of town meeting members per precinct. And it's automatic and in their charter. So if we had that in our charter now and we added 2 precincts, like the current redistricting would do, rather than add 18 town meeting members, mathematically, the number would stay the same. It would just be less town meeting members for each precinct. So that's one way to control the number of town meeting members. Bill, let's go ahead.
I think that I agree with David that we need to be careful not to bog down our charter with, over detail. We do have the bylaws to fall back on, but where we do come across something that is calling out for attention, and we see that attention has caused some major effect across the town. When you talk about redistricting, you're talking about voter turnout. Turnout is super low across the town, and anything that we can do to emphasize the importance of paying attention to the electoral process locally, making sure that people's precincts are, meeting the standards that the state wants to see and the town wants to see, that it might be a good idea because we're the fastest growing town in New England, that we include in our charter a requirement that we revisit this question every 3 to 5 years, where the selectmen appoint someone to do something, to look at the precincts, to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to allow the voter the ability to vote in an efficient way. So I do think something like that might fall into that. Some other things, we might be looking at a bylaw approach, but when it comes to a critical crisis in Plymouth, and that is voter turnout, this might be a way of answering that.
So you saying you think there should be a redistricting addressed in the charter? Yeah. Wesley?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the recent redistricting, I think that, I've been noticing the public's been paying a little more attention to what's going on in the town of Plymouth. And I, you know, dare I say, I think the public's just starting to pay attention to it. And because of that, I think they were called to task at this recent redistricting that, no, they didn't have they said they posted it, but by law, you have to have a public comment section. And I think that whether we put it in the charter or a bylaw, it obviously needs to be a little more fine-tuned, and because I think that the new town clerk and town staff really said, all right, you know, this is the way we do it. And I think that we need to say, no, this is the way it has to be done. Whether that's, you know, in the bylaws or the Charter Commission, I'm not sure, but obviously they need some more guidance.
So, just one thing to Wrestling's point. The reason you probably look at bylaw as an option, and would it work as a bylaw, should it be in the charter, is it raising to a level of importance? Because sometimes we put things in the charter and they slip through the cracks. Like at town meeting, we had a vote on an article which we were opposed to, and that was material. One of the arguments you made that day, yes, on Saturday, was that there was material given out that 2 days before. Well, clearly in our charter, it says that you need to have it 14 days in advance. If material comes out after that period of time, town meeting can take up the question to deny the article's discussion because the material came out too late by a 2/3 vote. So it's in the charter already. So it falls back to, so what should have happened at town meeting? Your argument that, hey, we're about to vote on something, they just gave out this information, I'm going to call for a 2/3 vote, because this article should be held from discussion, because the material wasn't given to us until after that
Wesley, that's
point.
been in the
Because
charter.
I asked the moderator about that. I asked, what's my, you know, what can I do here? And he told me, all you can do is get up and say, hey, don't vote on this.
No, wrestling was in the charter since 1999. And it was a much
Maybe we need to
debated
beef that up a little.
provision just for the reason what happened at this recent town meeting. People were complaining with great justification. We were getting this stuff at the last minute. Then it was put in the charter, it's a whole page. I think the confusion was at the same time it went into the charter with that 14-day requirement, it said that we had to get a report from the finance committee within no later than 14 days prior to town meeting. And if it didn't come within, within 14 days or no sooner than that, then we just wouldn't take it up unless we had a 2/3 vote. And it was very clear. And then they passed a bylaw, which kind of tried to add things to it. And the bylaw, I think, confused it, because the bylaw dealt with the same subject. It was a finance committee bylaw, and it explained their role.
Yeah.
And I think people at that point get kind of confused because it was already in the charter.
But the other thing that I was told is because it was a union negotiation, there's some wiggle room there.
Right.
And-
That was the excuse that
And
was
state law
given.
comes into,
Yeah.
but I've also been told that our charter and our bylaws preclude state law in
Well,
certain things.
No, the charter would have trumped this, and we should have done it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They didn't do it.
Exactly, well, that's good to know.
And I think it was one of the, serious flaws of that town meeting, that a lot of, I think, people understood that.
And you have to look at the fact that it was 112 to 20. And it just baffles me.
No, I think it's a very important provision. I think it belongs in the charter. It should be stressed. It's really up to the moderator, to enforce it, but anytime any member can stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, point of order.
Mr. Chairman,
Dave?
Bear in mind, whatever we think we want to do with redistricting, you're governed by state law, too.
Right.
So there's a limit to what you think you can do at this level, and it's great to have all this participation, but we've just completed a citizens' review and come up with what we think is a pretty good plan, but there's no saying that the state won't reject it.
But David, to that point, I'm always surprised because of the power that we have under the Home Rule statute to write our own provisions here in Plymouth. And many times, and there's one that we're going to come up in a few minutes, what we write here actually trumps state law. I'm surprised they put a lot of power in that Home Rule charter, in the Home Rule statute. The one that we're going to talk about is the special elections and filling vacancies. And there's a whole section in Boston in the state statute about how selectmen get replaced if they resign. But we can we can put something in our charter so it automatically goes to the next person on the ballot. And that would seem to be inconsistent, but we actually checked that out a month ago with the Secretary of State, and they agreed that if we wrote it in our charter, it would govern and would trump that provision in the state statute.
Well, let's hope we can correlate that with our
Right.
redistricting, because I'm interested to see what the state will do.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Frank, yes,
Yeah.
Frank Mand.
I'd like to say something. First of all, I think we need to try to stay one item at a time, but I understand how all of these things touch so many different types of considerations. And one of the things I came across to join the tangent here, that I came across, and I believe the Brookline bylaws, they don't really have a charter, but what stands for their charter is a standing committee that assures adherence to the charter. I think that's something we could have. I think that's, essentially they're like ombudsmen for the town charter that makes sure that we're following it, sticking to it, adhering to it, whatever. And I think that even in the most simple charters, that's potentially an important addition that could be very effective in bringing those things to the fore before it's too late and we're just talking about it past tense. Now, getting back to the redistricting process, I would say that I think this falls in the green category, clearly, that we all agree that some process should happen. And I would say as well that maybe a standing committee as well that is reviewing the redistricting process continually, not waiting for that 10-year period, not even waiting for a few years before, but continually evaluating, commenting on, maybe having meetings to discuss the potential changes that could happen redistricting-wise. I have radical beliefs in that area, in a sense, in that I believe that however many precincts we have far too many voting places. I'm not sure what the state laws say, but I'd like to have far more voting places. I think digital technology allows that. I think bringing voting into neighborhoods is one way to increase participation. That's what I'll say on this. Thank you.
Right. One thing, Frank, I think I heard you say that you thought the precinct should be looked at in between these 10-year, we just went through the decennial, whatever you call it, every 10 years. The question is, and I looked at this very closely just last few days because I wasn't sure what the answer was. Do we have the power here in Plymouth to revise our precincts in between those 10-year census redistricting exercises?
Yeah,
Because I thought we did.
I'm not sure, but
And I
wherever we have the possibility of either redistricting as we see fit, or again, more places that people actually go to the polls, we should do that. We should do whatever we can to increase voter participation. And it may seem absurd that, a 15-minute drive keeps people from voting, but I think it does. I think it should be in the communities and the neighborhoods. I think we have villages and other neighborhoods that people recognize as their community centers, and that's where you should vote. And the digital technology allows that. We should take advantage of that if the law allows that, but we should push that envelope.
Other
Bill,
questions, comments?
Betsy Hall.
Betsy Hall
Bill,
wants to-
are you ready for me?
Betsy Hall wants to speak.
Betsy, yes, speak maybe a little louder.
Hi, Bill. Hi, Bill. And hello to the committee. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there tonight. I didn't get home from Boston till almost 7. But, doctor's appointment. But I agree that we should put something about the redistricting in the charter that has to do with leading up to the redistricting committee. I think we do need a redistricting committee, but can't all happen at once. I think one of the problems this time is that people were kind of surprised that suddenly there was a map. At least that's how I saw it. And so I'm not sure you want a standing committee for 10 years between times, but maybe you do. But definitely something in the bylaws of the charter that the year before redistricting is going to happen, maybe a standing committee is set up, and then transparency being so important so that people don't feel blindsided and they don't feel like they're not part of the process. Because I think it's fabulous that so many more people start saying, well, hey, let me look at the redistricting and let me have a part in that, because I want it to work. So whatever we do is something we want to really work. And one of the things that still startles me is when Lynn Barrett, whom I think is fabulous, came to our charter commission and said, well, here's a part of the charter that we don't follow at all, so you want to change it. Well, I thought that was pretty surprising. We're not doing that, she said, and that's the, you can't put in finance requests the month before July 1st. So she said, we're not following that. So, and I don't know how any committee would have found that out unless you asked every department, are you following the charter? So we do want to not make the charter too long and too complicated that it can't be monitored and have some sort of a sense of, is this being followed or not? Because sometimes it doesn't make any sense to the executive branch to follow the charter, and yet on the other hand, it's the charter, you have to follow it. So I'm not sure what the balance is there, but we do need to have an executive branch that regards the charter as kind of law-proof. I mean, this is the charter. This is what our government does. So I do think that we need to be on top of that as we go forward.
Thank
You know, finding out, are there other parts of the charter right now that are not being followed? I think that's important.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, Betsy, we were just talking about that moments ago, about the 2 weeks in advance of town meeting material needs to be in the hands of a town meeting member. And if not having that information, and if it comes out after that point, town meeting still controls whether or not they debate this at a 2/3 vote. That didn't happen at town meeting. And the idea of some sort of oversight, like Lynn has indicated, some of these things aren't being followed. Before we abandon some of these things that are in the charter, we have to find out, one, how are they written, and are they written in a way that's confusing to the person that has to implement it? And do we have a way of any enforcement or oversight to these activities that are in the charter? That if you do, keeping to David's thought, keeping things either over at the bylaw level, keeping our charter simple and not bogging it down, or if we do put something in the charter, be very clear in what the requirements would be. Here in this case, when it comes to the process of redistricting, yes, every 10 years the country does a census, and every 10 years the Commonwealth requires towns to update their precincts based on that. But that doesn't stop a town to look at it in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. So there are things that we should be paying attention to because of our size, because of our growth. Anything that we can do to pay attention to turnout is a good thing, but you would definitely keep something like that very simple in the charter, to the fact that the Town of Plymouth Board of Selectmen every 5 years will appoint a committee to look at the precincts and make recommendations to the board. In the end, it will always be a Board of Selectmen that decides what to do with the precincts. And we have evidence in the last 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, we had precincts that grew beyond the legal limit of 4,000. We had precincts that went to nearly 6,000, which would make it the biggest precinct in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We could have corrected that 5 years ago, or 3 or 2 years ago. When it happened, we could have corrected it. It didn't have to sit there as a problem. So we do have some ways of, drawing attention to processes like that. But if we do choose to be in the charter, we should be very clear, very concise, and keep it simple, or keep it over in bylaws.
Dave?
Well, I have a question, and I don't know if we need legal interpretation from town council, but my understanding of the process is the state sends down a map, and that map is done by the Collins Institute down at UMass Dartmouth, and the most the town can do is tweak. Is that correct?
That is not, well, that's correct that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Secretary of State's office, will send to every town a suggested map. And down at UMass, there is a place called the Donahue Institute.
Sorry, wrong name.
Yeah, and what they do is that they take the census information, okay, the block votes, and they take them and they put them together and say, well, here's a bunch of little block votes that add up for 4,000, so you should probably do a precinct here and here and there. And they really operate off the previous map that the town had. So they take whatever town map they have, and then they alter it with this new population and these new census numbers. They give it to the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office sends it to towns and say, okay, here's suggested map. A couple of things. When you talk to the Secretary of State's office, they're very clear. You can either take that map and completely throw it out and do your own, or you can take ours and adjust it. Things were made very complicated because during the pandemic, the census didn't come in on time. Where we would have had these numbers in January, we didn't get them until August. And that's when they came out with the official map, and now they said, September, you better have your act together. So we were asked to do something that we've never been asked to do before. That's not, the other thing that the state did with their maps is they sent it down, and even though they didn't have an official map, they sent one down earlier this year and said, here's what it might look like based on not only the 2010 census, but we're able to calculate based on the fact that in the town of Plymouth, we do a census every year, and other towns do. So we have information that comes right up to 2019. And the state, knowing we weren't going to get anything on January to work with, gave us this thing, which was a map designed up till 2019, and said, play with this until you're ready, because August 14th is when the real numbers come out. Which was the map. As Betsy said, it all kind of struck everybody by surprise when they saw that map, and we were asked to make a decision very quickly. But you are right. The state does work on a map with the Institute and the Secretary of State's office. They do give it to us, but in the end, we have complete control of what that precinct looks like.
Just a couple of things, comments I want to make. First is, I definitely think this should go in the charter. When you have because the process involves both the legislative, it should involve the legislative, and it certainly involves the executive. When you have the select board attempting to do the redistricting all by itself, that's the way we started off here a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. It looked like there wasn't going to be any citizen participation. And that's the kind of provision that belongs in a charter that tries to establish, checks and balances, that tries to say, well, they can do this, but it's going to be checked over here by the legislative or whatever. The select board might think are going to do the entire redistricting all alone. And I think that's not right. And I think that started a lot of citizen pushback, back in August and September when we heard about that. And there was we had to pretty much demand a hearing. And then a working group was broadened, expanded. The whole idea was that citizens had to speak up to get involved in a process, which was very, a crucial process, because we're talking neighborhoods, communities that had been together for generations. It wasn't just a Board of Selectmen select board's function to draw the new maps. So that's why I think it belongs in the charter. The one question I do have, and I don't have an answer yet, is whether the precincts can be adjusted in between these 10-year intervals. And I had thought probably they could, but now I'm not so sure. I can't find any justification for it. I actually have a query into the Secretary of State to see if they think that we can adjust our precincts over the next, between now and 10 years from now, whether we can adjust them as the town grows here or grows there. It isn't clear to me that we can. We may have to wait till 10 years out and do it then, but we're going to get a definitive answer. I also asked town council the same question, and I haven't got an answer there either. So I think it may have changed from what the law used to be, David, because I noticed that in the Arlington charter, they have a very elaborate provision for redistricting. But it obviously isn't working under today's scheme where the state starts the process like we just went through. So I think the law may well have changed since then. But I need to find out whether or not we have any power in between these 10-year intervals. But once we get to the next one, 10 years from now, I think it's important to have this in the charter, that there's going to be a citizen working group. The way they started it off in this town charter I looked at, the maps were actually proposed to everybody in the town. And this is a town done of about 40,000 people. Everybody saw what the map was proposed to be. And that's when people took a look and decided to get in, if you could get involved and a working group was appointed. This was all set forth, the whole process. It seemed to be very fair, and it gave the citizens a right to participate.
Well, I'm in full agreement. I'm not in opposition. I just want to know what we legally can do and what we can't do. That's all.
So these other towns that have it in their charter to appoint a examination every 5 years, we don't know whether or not their work is implementable.
No, I haven't, Bill, I can't find anywhere that is today a practice that's legal. Because I thought it'd be great if we could change our precincts. Then I began to think, well, what does that do to the representative in the Senate, state districts, if you're changing your precinct lines in between 10 years? I just don't know the answer, but I intend to find out definitively from the Secretary of State.
Yeah, because we do have one, the state did something unique where they're making a ruling on their precincts now, sooner rather than later, meaning that we did our precincts, we had our precincts, the selectmen voted on it, and then the state came in and said, this is what your House seat's gonna look like. And that has required us to go back to see what we could do to accommodate that. So you're right, when you do change a precinct, you do change a House seat and a Senate seat, which we don't have control of. That's the Senate. We just go to them with our recommendation of our precinct. So that's a very good point. So even though it's in charters to examine the situation every 5 years, the findings, how are they implementable?
So we got more homework to do on what our specific legal powers are with respect to redistricting. Any more comments on this?
Yeah, I have a comment, Bill.
Pardon?
It's Betsy. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I heard someone say, and I don't remember who it was, but they said we have too many committees in Plymouth. I don't know if anyone else has heard that said. But I think when we're talking about standing committees, that's something that we also need to talk about, if that's an opinion by some of our residents. I think all the committees that we have that encourage residents to be involved, my opinion is that's great. The more people involved, the more people who know what's going on and care what's going on. We saw a huge amount of participation from from Brook Road. And oftentimes that's something like that is what gets people running for town meeting. It's what gets people interested from town meeting into what else is going on. They get on a committee. So I'm for Bill's suggestion about setting up some committees. There may be some pushback from people who think we already have too many committees, but I just want to put out there that I think if people want to participate in our government, that's a great thing.
Okay. David, yes.
Speaking as someone who has worked with a lot of committees, I don't disagree with your theory and I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think there should be a yearly review of the committees And those that are no longer needed and those that are no longer active should be disbanded.
Yeah, I agree, David.
As a matter of fact, Dave, we used to always have a provision in the town meeting that basically was like a sunset review of committees near the beginning of the town meeting. And if a committee hadn't functioned or done anything, it was eliminated. And that seems to be gone now from our warrant. Right. So we may, good idea to put that back in. Okay, let's go, the next item I had on the agenda was the use of town council. And again, I think this is a really important function. I don't know how much belongs in the charter, but I think Plymouth has a lot to, is not getting our full benefit from the use of town council. I'll just give a couple of examples and hope that the rest of you pick it up. For example, other charters have town council much more active in the run-up to town meeting, having to review every warrant article to be sure it's informed and legal. And what's very important is helping petitioners to want to present a warrant article, to put it in form, to be presented to town meeting. And I've seen many examples, and I think we have one here tonight in the audience, where petitioners try to put together a warrant article, and they get slapped down, told it's just not in the right form, and basically told to find their own lawyer and somehow put it in form that's going to be acceptable. And I think it's absolutely frustrating and maddening to these petitioners, and I don't think they should be put through this process. And that's what town council is all about, you know, as long as it's done within reason. But town council should be available to help petitioners, I think, structure warrant articles so that they're ready for town meeting. Another example of town council is in some communities where they're asked to render opinions on legal questions, and their opinions are bound in a book that's accessible to every citizen in the town hall. So all these opinions of town council are already there for questions that have been answered by town council. I just think the use of town council in Plymouth is very stringent, too rigid, and we're not getting the full benefit of what we should be. Comments? Wrestling.
My concern is, you know, that I'm not sure what it costs for town council to come to town meeting, but I'm sure, you know, that anytime we use them, there's a cost involved. You know, there was some discussion about having an in-house counsel instead of, you know, someone that, you know, we only bring in for town meeting, that we have somebody at town hall that's, you know, available to that. I see that more towards your point.
Agree.
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but again, having been someone who worked with a local town council, it was greatly advantageous to go with one of the larger firms because they had different members who could do different aspects. One's, can you hear me?
Yep.
One's specialty was municipal law, one's specialty was zoning, one's specialty was environmental. That's why we went with the multi-member firm. Now, I don't know if you can appoint a local person to do what wrestling is asking, and if there's a conflict there that would be insurmountable. I think it's a good idea. Again, I just don't know if it's possible.
Yeah.
Bill?
So to Dave's and wrestling's point, and to your original point, I do believe that I think that right now we have town council, and they serve at the pleasure of the Board of Selectmen. And it's just been kind of going on for a number of years. I think we need to build into the charter some language that says every 3 years, the town manager will report to the selectmen in a public meeting the status of council, the costs, the success and failures, so that the selectmen can either say, continue with this council, or we need to put it out to bid. Whether we go and look at another firm of a magnitude, David's absolutely right. Plymouth is too small to just have kind of a mom-and-pop operation. We have to find a firm that's going to be able to handle all the complications of Plymouth, from zoning to nuclear to growing economy, everything that's going on in Plymouth. We really are a candidate for a leading firm to be available to us. But that's not to say that you couldn't have like a local facilitator of the legal questions that are coming in. To cut the costs with the larger firm, some of these questions could be navigated, some of the smaller questions could be navigated on a local level. If it grew to a certain situation, now the firm is going to have to take it over and deal with this issue. But I do call for two things: this idea of at least a legal person, an attorney or counsel in-house, to sort out where these questions go with the larger firm, and have that firm. But I don't think that the firm should just kind of sit out there and just exist. I think that there should be some accountability, some transparency, and some examination. At a certain point in time, we should say, it's been 3 years, town manager, report to us on the cost, the success, failures of council, and then the selectmen in a public meeting have to say, okay, continue with that council, or we suggest that we put this question out to a bid.
Mr. Chair?
That's it.
Mr. Chair?
Comment?
I love that. And I think it's something that, for example, the people who do the clickers at town meeting, we were amazed when the precinct chairs found out how much we pay them, especially during that total fumble that they had. And I think that more of that needs to go on. You know, I totally think that we need to look at stuff, big items like our town council, and say, are we in the right place? Have we got the right guys? And are they accessible? Are they, you know, how much does it cost? Because personally, I think Lynn Barrett should get up on every article that's big money and say, what does this cost our taxpayer? And I think that that's one of the things that our GQ public is really asking for is, I want to know how much this costs. How much is this going to cost me? How much is that fire truck going to do to my taxes? How much is that new fire building going to do to my taxes? And I think, you know, Copeland and Page is a great, you know, large firm, but, you know, I think something like saying every 3 years, are we in the right place? I think that should be done across the board.
So you like the idea of looking at it every few years? Right. I'm
Mr.
wondering
Chairman.
whether just in the run-up to town meeting, council could be, you know, it would just be for that period of time that some lawyer would be assigned to kind of, if a petitioner had a question. as they get
Mr.
something
Chairman?
ready. Yeah, but
My hand up.
Mr. Chairman?
Betsy,
Yes, is it possible for town meeting to have a council, that town meeting, not necessarily somebody different, but somebody that is assigned to answer town meeting member questions, and therefore a petitioner could go to a town meeting member with their petition, if, from somebody from their precinct or not, probably somebody from their precinct. And then council could also be brought into the question if need be, because it seems as though the council pretty much represents the executive branch, which is normal and natural, but but town meeting doesn't, as a town meeting member, or even Joe Hutchinson, my chairman, doesn't have any access to to council, nor does anybody in precinct 12 have any easy access to council.
well, I mean, at town meeting, you generally have the head town council, whoever it is,
Right, but I mean,
the lead
for this
person, and
one
he's there.
question-
He may not be called upon as many times as perhaps he should be, but he's sitting there ready to answer a question.
No, I mean, in the run-up to town meeting, in the couple of months before town meeting, or before the warrant is due, could there be somebody who could answer questions? That was expected. It's part of what we do as business of town meeting, is if a petitioner wants to bring forward an article, it would be a council person who would automatically be available.
Yeah, I mean, I do think Betsy, that it's important to have just one counsel. I'd hate to see, more than one lawyer at town meeting answer questions and they'd start debating it among themselves. I mean, that would be a disaster.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't thinking so much that, I'm just thinking about
I'm
that.
just trying
So
to make
maybe it's
the
the same
government
person
more
who comes to town
user-friendly by
meeting.
helping petitioners who sometimes have, some great articles have gone through Plymouth Town Meeting that never would have been there except for petitioners that we passed.
Right. So there, I'm talking about some way for petitioners to access the counsel that we already are using.
Right.
And maybe that they send it to the moderator, ahead of time, but I'm not sure that that's the best way to do it. Might be the best way to do it is for them to have some sort of access to the counsel we're already paying. That they're paying, by the way, not we're paying, but they're.
Well, further, more comment? I mean, I think that
Yeah.
just to kind of maybe finish up this point, but I think the pendulum swung a little too far to one side to try to conserve town council and not use town council and save money on town council, but I think you can be kind of too extreme on that, and we're not asking for a
Chairman.
lot of time, it's just to have a council more friendly, available to help a petitioner who's run into a roadblock in how to phrase an article for town meeting. I can't
Mr. Chairman.
believe that would take an awful lot of time.
Mr. Chairman, this is Frank Mand.
Frank?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's the point I wanted to make, that I've seen, from my perspective, town council not used. The excuse being, we don't want to go to court, we don't want to use counsel, and I think we've erred far on the side of having counsel and not using them. And I think a lot of the issues we have in town are because we've been timid to assert what the town wants and to argue with moneyed sources that they need to follow these, for example, the master plan, for example, some of our bylaws and things. I'm speaking as a charter commission member, but also as a planning board member. I see a pattern of hesitancy that I'd like to see changed. I think we need to use town council in a strong way, and that we've erred too far on the side of they're there, but for what purpose?
Right. David? Yep, we agree. Okay, next item on tonight's agenda is there a better way to fill vacancies from multi-member boards than, like we did in August, convening a special election? Many other towns don't do it that way. They have it right in their charters. If somebody resigns from the select board or from the planning board, that the vacancy is filled by looking at the ballot for the preceding election to see who got the next highest number of votes. And then at least one charter had a smart provision which said, provided that that person got at least 25% of the votes. So you don't end up in a situation where the runner-up is a distant third or whatever with very few votes. They have to at least gotten some minimum number of votes. In this particular case, they were proposing 25%. So what do you think of a provision such as this here in Plymouth?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take the opportunity to speak again and say that I agree that something like that has to be put in place. One of the ideas I had was a select person emeritus, someone who is respected in the community and fulfills generally a dignitary role, but can stand by in case this happens and fulfill that position, and everyone believes in their ability to do so. And we have many people in this community that could do that, as opposed to who lost the election. That would serve the purpose, definitely, but I think that we could have a select person emeritus that stands ready to do so and has the respect of the
Who would
community.
select this person?
Well, I think that would be an appointment, but
Pardon
I
me?
think it's pretty clear that there's several individuals in town. Mr. Gallerani is very respected himself. Mr.
No, Frank, I heard you
Tavares.
suggest that the position be filled by a by a select person emeritus, but who selects that person?
Yeah, I haven't thought that through to that point, but it could be someone that's amenable to the entire remaining select board. They would be appointed before this position, this situation occurs. Somebody, everybody agrees could fulfill that role. And then they could serve as well, again, the dignitary aspects, and there's so much of that, that a community like ours would benefit from.
Okay. Wrestling.
So,
yeah.
Bill,
I,
Recognize wrestling.
I would caution, the public voted somebody in to, let's take selectmen. And if the public voted somebody in, and then we give the authority to appoint somebody, if they step down, takes the public out of that process. I don't know how to do it, and I think that when someone steps down, like they did in selectmen, it can be a political move. It can say, the election was closed, so I'm going to step down, so, the next person gets it up. So I just caution that we need to appreciate the public's vote. And I think that it's, I hate to have a special election. It's expensive, it's time consuming. I don't know how to appreciate the public's vote other than on a special election. That's my
But that
comment.
person's gone, right, that steps down. I mean, you're going to lose the person that resigns no matter what. So the question is, how do you replace it with somebody that the public has had at least some input?
Well,
may I say something?
Betsy?
Bill?
Yes.
We would include a provision, I would think, that person only serves until the next election. So if we go with the voter who received the next highest vote, the candidate who received the next highest vote, it would be less than a year that person would serve.
Right.
So they've already been voted, and there's not a long time before another vote will take place. I think that was some people's objection to a special election, was it's not that long between now and the next election. So let's not have a special election. But
Well,
I
guess
think
that's the
that,
question.
what's the question?
I mean, the
How
question is
long they
whether
would
they're filling
serve?
that vacancy or whether they're just until the next election or not.
But you
Yeah, I
can't-
would
you-
suggest
you
that we
can't-
put in just,
You can't assume that it's going to be a 1 year or less. It could happen in the first year, somebody could get sick. So your idea of serving the remainder of that term is very valid. But don't think that it could be just 1 year or less. It could be any amount of time.
no, I don't say serve until that person's post is filled. You would only serve till the next election, whenever that was. So there would be a new person, it would be a new election for a select person at the next election. Even though someone filled that space, when they fill that space, they would know, I'm only filling that space till May of the next year. But that would go in the charter. That would be part of the provision, that if someone steps down, I think it should be from any elected office, that the next highest vote getter will fill that position only until the next election. So let's say it was a person who got elected for 5 years, and somebody stepped down in the first 6 months. That person, the next highest vote getter, would not serve the next 4.5 years. They would still only serve till the next election, which would avoid a special election, and it would also avoid someone who didn't get the most votes. So I would want to see both things. I would want to see, yes, we'll fill it from the vote, the highest candidate vote, and then also they only serve till the very next election.
I would think we'd be subverting this in our own way then, because we'd be given the bully pulpit position, the honor, to someone who was not elected, and therefore giving them the benefit of that position. I would think it should not be someone who ran in the previous election. It gives them too much benefit. That's why I would favor somebody that would both not be an elected official at the time and would agree not to run after they fulfilled the term until the next election can be held.
So clarify that again, Frank, and Betsy. I thought Betsy was talking about someone stepping down, there's a vacancy, we need to find a process of filling it efficiently. One of the ideas that Betsy has is that someone would fill it, the top highest vote getter, till the next election. Because there are state requirements where, this, like in this past summer, we could have either waited for the next election, or the selectmen could call for a special election. There was enough time there, they felt like they should have a special election because it was 6 or 7 months off to not serve with that person. So that's what Betsy, I thought, was talking about. Frank, you're talking about a different position filling, right? Something different
I'm
from
also
filling a vacancy? You're talking about you're talking about having someone serve in the ceremonial condition
I'm saying
to represent.
it could serve a dual purpose, and I'm saying that if we were to choose the person, the next highest vote getter, we'd be giving them a benefit from that, that they didn't get on their own by being elected. So I would say it shouldn't be somebody who ran for office and was defeated, now appointing them. The difference between two candidates could be 100 votes. The opportunity to serve that role. Of course, they may do it badly, but I still think it's a benefit that we shouldn't bestow on someone that wasn't elected. That's all.
But I think we already have that, don't we, as a town meeting member? If I have to step down, the next highest vote getter fills my position. Don't we already have
Not
that?
necessarily. Not
No?
necessarily. And prime example, what I was going to say is you can't always go for the next highest vote getter. Prime example is I had somebody step down in my precinct from town meeting, and Pearl called me and said, well, the process is you need to have a caucus. You can pick the next highest vote getter, or you can just pick anybody you want. She said, the problem is you have one guy who got 40 votes and 4 people who got 2 votes. And the person who was 40 votes wasn't in our precinct, so we couldn't pick him. But there were 4 people who were the next highest vote getters. So it doesn't always work out that way. So it's, going with the next highest vote getter is not always the best way to do it, because there might be 4 or 5 people that are the next highest vote getter. And,
But Russell, that's why if you have a provision like this, you need to take care of both parts to it.
Right,
You need to
right.
take care of like a bit of the next, so that you don't have a situation where somebody only had 3 or 4 votes is the next highest. vote.
right, exactly, exactly. That was just my point.
So you gotta write it carefully. Okay, so let's change pace a little bit and ask Bill Cohan about financial information and how it's presented during the run-up and to town meeting.
Okay, so is this how a finance committee might work? This is the discussion. Okay, so I had suggested this, and others have suggested it, that we have a town meeting that is more involved in the budget process. That right now, the way that it stands, we have this Finance Advisory Committee, it's appointed by the moderator, and I think there was some adjustments to the appointment process, and they review the articles, and they prepare material. The town meeting members get it, they discuss it amongst themselves in caucuses, they discuss it amongst themselves at town meeting, and they vote on it. My thought was that this process of voting on a $250 million budget town meeting members should be more proficient at that. They should be involved in that process. They should be vested in the process, so they have to take responsibility for it, rather than having someone come to them with paperwork and handing them paperwork and they look at that paperwork. I think what we have to do is have a finance entity that is made up of town meeting members, that is examining the financial request put upon town meeting, and they are providing advisory information. Here's the briefing material, here's all the stuff. But what now we have at town meeting is that when we go to debate this, I have 15, 16, 17 people that served on this finance entity that are on the town meeting floor and who are going to take up this issue and debate it with some substantive knowledge. Right now, our finance committee is removed from this process. And I think that if town meeting or any entity that takes up this cause needs to be more, they need to be part of the budget process, because the budget process is quite complicated. There are department heads that are starting to meet now to come up with what their budget's going to look like. They're meeting with town managers, and the finance committee currently has subcommittees that interact with these entities. And then before they even go to a hearing, there is a discussion that's taking place on what that budget for that department's going to look like. And eventually, the town manager makes a report to the selectmen, and the selectmen have these, discussions, but the articles make their way to town meeting, and they eventually make it to the finance committee, and the finance committee takes them up, and they do all this work. There's subcommittees, there's discussions. They go till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and then they compile it in a book and give it to town meeting members, and then we're to decipher it. And I think that that's a big, big problem, that if we are going to continue to come to, seek the highest standard in terms of our decision-making, whatever form of government we have, I think that we need to have an entity in place that is more interactive with the body that has to take responsibility for the final vote. So I think we need, I'm suggesting,
Right now you have a finance committee.
correct.
And you have town meeting, you suggesting interposing another?
Well, I would no longer have a finance and advisory. I'd have like a Ways and Means Committee.
Have a what?
I'd have like a Ways and Means Committee. I would have an entity that, that the town would rely on to
Place
build.
of the finance committee.
Yeah, this would be in replace of finance advisory. This would be an entity made up of the legislative body to build a budget, to examine a budget, and then send it to town meeting, and then debate the budget.
It's like a Ways and Means committee.
Kind of Ways and Means. It could still be, what you name it is really, it would be a finance committee. It would be basically a finance committee. I don't know if Ways and Means is really the word, but the reason I bring up Ways and Means, there are other legislative bodies that vote on budgets, and they participate in building the budget. Town meeting is not participating in building a budget. And whether it's town meeting or some other form of government, whoever ends up in voting on this budget needs to participate in the budget building process. And so my thought is that we take a different approach to this process, and that is we form an entity made up of the body that's going to have to deliberate and take responsibility and vote for the budget.
Mr. Chairman, Brookline has such a committee they simply refer to as an advisory committee. It has up to 30 members, 16 of which are town meeting members. The others can be appointed from the individual precincts. So it seems to be that hybrid Ways and Means that Mr. Cohen is referring to. And it also says their duties include creating and presenting a budget to town meeting.
Where was
So
this?
I think that's Brookline.
Brookline, yeah. Frank, did you have any notes on that particular charter?
I do.
'Cause
I
that-
do have
I'd be very
notes.
interested to see that provision.
Yeah.
So how would it work?
Well, they say, I can read from it. They say their duties include consider any and all municipal questions, including appropriation requests and proposed action under all articles in the warrant, submit a budget at annual town meeting, may examine the books and records of any boards, committee. So they serve, to me, it sounds like they serve as both the advisory and finance committee that we have, but they're also, they're grounded in town meetings. 16 of the members are town meeting members and have to be according to their regulation.
Okay, David?
Well, if we're going to pursue this way of thinking, the simplest way to do it would be eliminate the finance committee, advisory and finance committee, and let it go back to the precinct chairs. And you would have one member from each precinct. And they could also handle the advisory aspect as to zoning and changes and, of that nature. So if we're going to pursue this action, that would be the simplest thing that comes to my mind.
Bill, I'd like to see what exactly how Brookline puts it together, though. They still have a finance committee, and they also have a committee of town meeting members? Frank, is that,
I don't think they have a finance committee. They do have,
or an advisory committee?
the main title of that is the advisory committee. Let me take a quick look here. They have a Department of Finance. No, they don't have a finance committee. So this one serves as that hybrid. That's what I was saying. They're firmly grounded, 16 members that have to be town meeting members. So they're involved in that discussion, that debate, that sphere. But they also serve as kind of the finance committee to review things and present a budget. So that budget, sounds to me, would not be the kind of abstract budget that we get from the finance committee, and that doesn't have the participation of town meeting. I think it would be something far more integrated with that, and I think it would accomplish what Mr. Cohen hopes to accomplish.
Frank, if you could give us some notes on that, because Brookline certainly is one we should be looking at, because it's the only town that even approaches Plymouth in size that still has a town meeting. I'd like to see how they do put it together. And that would be interesting. If we're going to bring people in like Amherst and Barnstable, I think we should also bring in Brookline and ask them all these questions. I'm very interested in that approach, though, that you just described. I'd like to see it. Presley.
Yeah, I think this is an extremely interesting conversation and an extremely important conversation. I just go back to Committee of Precinct Chairs. We discussed FinCom.
Right.
And one of the members said that, he was really starting to pay attention, and he said, every article is 1300, 13100. And it was interesting because I have two new town meeting members in my precinct, and I asked them, what they thought about town meeting, how it went. And their biggest comment was, why do we have this FinCom that really seems, from the numbers,
Right.
I hate to say it, rubber stamping it. And I know that there's discussion because they had a great, supplement that talked about the discussion, but, if you look historically at FinCom, it's, all the votes are, and I would love to, be looking at something like, like Bill has suggested, and I, a lot of town meeting members are frustrated with FinCom. One of the other things that came up during one of the towns was that FinCom only goes by financial stuff.
Right.
And I think it's extremely important that we look at FinCom as an entity and where it's going and where it should go.
It's a very big topic, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, many charters just have FinCom limited to financial articles. And Plymouth has, of course, with the precinct chairs, you have a ready-made group already formed with a history that could look at other articles.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because the thing that I noticed, and I just picked this up, when sitting on the Community Preservation Committee, we're recommending articles to town meeting. And I have to go to the selectmen, and I have to go to caucuses, and I have to go to all these different activities. And I've been in front of the FinCom now twice a year for 2 years, twice a year for now 20 years. And in that capacity, I've gone through many, many chairmen, many, many committees, and I see the work that they do. It's pretty impressive. They're meeting shortly after town meeting with department heads to start talking about what their budget's going to look like. Then they're meeting with the town manager. There's subcommittees. They go late into the night. They gather all this information. Then they have lengthy debates. We see their minutes that they're providing to us now, which is very humbling. It's not like a lot of thought isn't going into the process, but it's the lost in the translation, that when it gets from the book to us, we're not as invested, it's not as transparent, we're not as knowledgeable. So as town meeting members, I watch these debates because I have to be there, And through osmosis, I'm realizing, hey, look at this, this FinCom is doing an enormous amount of work, wouldn't this be great? Then we go to town meeting, and the FinCom kind of sits there, they don't participate, they're there, and we're debating it. And I'm watching this debate and remembering back to the nights of the FinCom meetings and saying, gee, if the FinCom members are allowed to participate in this debate, it would be different. So I think that,
And this from a nominated group,
Yeah.
not an elected group.
not elected, they're not elected,
And
they're
I think
nominated.
I think the public is starting to really question that.
Yeah,
And I think that's something we really should look at.
that's the accountability that we're looking,
We used
that we
to,
need in the system.
You know, years ago, when the Finance Committee was much more outspoken, much more active, and when it came to the budget, we, actually, I remember it vividly, we devoted a full day, or in that case, 3 separate nights to go over the budget. Took maybe 6 hours. We went through every single line item, and people would get up and raise questions, you know, why do you need this, why do you need that? And the Finance Committee would argue it. It was a real debate. It was none of this passing the budget in half an hour or whatever. So, it's interesting how it's back and
Was it
forth.
done before, this is when? When was this, how did the town meeting go through the budget? Bill, you were mentioning how town meeting in the
When
past.
did this happen?
Yeah, when was the town meeting
Well, I'd
pulling
say
apart the budget like that?
Certainly when I first became town meeting member, probably for the first 20 years of
Really?
that process. Probably more under the previous moderator, who seemed to spend a lot more time on these items.
So you're talking about town meeting,
Yes.
not the FinCom,
Right.
but the town meeting. So when,
But we weren't seeing 13-0 votes all over the place.
Right.
The FinCom had mixed, you know, really quite a different votes with
Right.
close, some of them were really close.
Right, interesting.
But the point is that we looked at every single budget line item, and it took hours.
And Malagu, do you remember it that way too? So why are we not doing that at these town meetings? Why are we not going through every budget item and voting on it? Because going back to, Dave Peck had an interesting idea about separating town meetings to budgetary issues, zoning issues. So you don't mix in the Brook Road with the budget, you know? That you segregate the,
You mean the 2 town meetings?
yeah, that
When they
the,
were originally designed, the budget was all supposed to be the spring,
okay.
and nothing in the fall.
And what was the fall
was
for?
devoted to zoning and bylaws.
Really? So we might need to
And it's
look at,
gotten jumbled
Yeah.
with the finance now in the fall as well.
And I talked to a bunch of department heads, like the chief, and they didn't get something through town meeting in the spring when the budget was talking, and so they brought it to the fall. And I said, well, wait a minute, you know, you're not supposed to be doing that. Well, we just didn't get it into the
No,
spring. so,
no,
you know.
wrestling, in the early days, you couldn't
Right.
do it. They
Right.
said, "We're sorry, you've had your chance." Right.
so we should have a designated town meeting just to deal with the finances and keep the confusion of zoning or something else out of that equation. I know Dave Peck put together some notes, and one of the things he said was just that.
The only problem with that is that having 2 town meetings a year, if you only regulate one town meeting to financial, if someone wants something zoning or Brook Road, they gotta wait a year
Well,
to bring that
actually,
up.
The way it used to work was you could bring up those kind of articles in the spring. And the point was you couldn't bring the budget up in the fall.
Oh, okay,
It
okay.
was like a one-way
Yep.
street. So you didn't have to wait a year for zoning.
Because you could have a special within the second
Right.
annual.
But I mean, the spring town meeting was really the big town meeting. And all budget was supposed to be there and anything else that was timely.
Bill, Betsy here. Do I remember that a previous charter commission in maybe the last 10 years brought to town meeting separating having just a finance committee that didn't look at any articles that were not financial, and that failed? Does anyone else remember that? I don't know, maybe in the last 10 or 15 years, it was,
I do,
seem to remember
Betsy, I do
voting on
remember
it.
there was a discussion about what the FinCom should be hearing. Should they be only
Right.
hearing things that had to do with finances, or should they be hearing things on zoning and all these other things? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and town meeting at that time rejected it, but I would be in favor of bringing it back again, that the finance committee is looking at budget expenditures, et cetera, and focusing all of that wonderful and dedicated energy to just the budget and just finances, because when you bring in everything else, for example, I can't think of anything right now, but we had a circus bylaw, for example, asking the advisory and finance to focus on all of these other things dilutes, I think, the time and energy that the finance committee has to look at our budget.
That, like I think David mentioned it, that you already have this thing in place, and it's FinCom, you already have this thing in place, and it's the Committee of Precinct Chairs. Should they be hearing the zoning articles? Should they be hearing articles that are unrelated? Because I remember when I was first started in 2002, there was a chairman of the FinCom, he's like, what are you doing in front of us? And I said, well, I'm presenting community preservation articles. And he said, well, no, that money has already been determined to be raised in that money is not it's not raised or appropriated. The voters have decided to put this money aside for housing, historical, and open space. You don't need to be in FinCom. And council agreed with them. They said, actually, you don't have to go to FinCom. But I always went to FinCom because I thought it was important that they hear these articles. And, but over the years, there've been different chairmen, Betsy, that had that opinion that there was one chairman of FinCom who said, I just want to hear finance. And then there was another one that says, I want to hear everything. And then eventually we settled into FinCom hearing everything.
A little bit of history, the original Committee of Precinct Chairs in the first 3 years, I think in the third year, the committee actually went to town meeting and proposed a change which would make the Finance Committee only report on financial implicated articles, and all the other articles would either be reported on by the Planning Board as zoning articles or by the Committee of Precinct Chairs. And that actually went to town meeting. I think it was a little ahead of its time, and town meeting did not adopt that because they weren't even that familiar with what the Committee of Precinct Chairs was all about. But now the Committee of Precinct Chairs has a history, and good to revisit that. Right. Well, should we try one more? That's a green, by the way. Another green, okay. Michelle, is this helpful, Richard Green and Richard?
Is this helpful, Michelle? Yeah. Bill is asking to you. This discussion, were you getting it?
I'm getting a sense of what's going to stay on the list and what's, yeah. Another one is the regular follow-up to town meeting action with quarterly reports from the executive branch, sort of the legislative oversight, which is, it's kind of like infrastructure we've been talking about now for the last 3 or 4 years, but we haven't implemented it yet.
Yeah. So the Committee of Precinct Chairs did form a legislative oversight subcommittee, and they're working on something. And they're going to take it up at their next meeting. And I'm going to, once they do, I'd like to take that report and I'm on that subcommittee, and bring it to this committee for consideration.
Good.
Because they're looking to implement something that would track an article after town meeting. And it's kind of interesting. Some of the thoughts of that would be that you would try to keep this process as simple as possible, where there was a spreadsheet available after town meeting where all the articles, say spring 2020, and it would have all your articles. And there would be a status box, and you could go to you can go to a shared Google Doc. Whoever sponsored that article is required every 6 months to come in and populate that box, the status of the article. Has it gone to bid? Is it with the design and review? Is it with the building committee? Is the article closed out? So there are boxes that you would fill out over a period of time so that not only department heads and the town manager and the selectmen and the committee of precinct chairs and others can see the status of an article, but it's very user-friendly that someone could go online, the town website, and see the status of an article. This adds to transparency. It would be something that you could go to on the website, find this spreadsheet, and it would have all the articles and the status of those articles. The only ones that could get in there and populate those boxes are the sponsors of the article, and they'd be required to do that every 6 months.
This sounds like an interesting proposal.
Yeah.
Has the committee already put it together, or is it still just?
So the subcommittee has drafted this.
Right. Well, you haven't got-
Committee of Precinct Chairs is talking about it, and I want to get their permission to release it to this committee for us to consider possible incorporation into the charter. I think Wrestling wanted to say something.
No, this is something that we've been talking about at precinct chairs for a while. And interesting, when I brought something about this up, when David Gould came before us, David actually sent me a spreadsheet with all of the stuff that he's working on.
Really? Good.
And it had all of the stuff that he's talking about. And he was like, "Is this what you're talking about?" And I said, "Yes."
Right, good.
So it can be done, and I think I've always said, town meeting votes on a $3 million project, and, I don't need to pick on Stevens Field, but we'd never get anything further than, okay, we gave you $3 million, it's 5 years later, where are we on this project?
$2 million.
Coming out of the precinct chairs.
$2 million. But when David provided that to you, Wrestling,
What?
David was providing you what he is doing internally with his department.
Yes, yes. He had a spreadsheet that
For his
had, it was exactly what you were talking about. It had, these are my projects, this is what's been spent on them, this is where they are.
And that was just the Office of Marine Environmental
Yeah,
Affairs.
yeah.
So we're absolutely, yeah.
DPW,
Yeah,
planning,
yeah.
right.
It's, I've always said that town meeting needs to take back its power. And town meeting, or the precinct chairs, need to say, and we've said it to, Bill a lot. Hey, Bill, we really want to know where we are on Stevens Field.
Right.
And I think that there needs to be something in the charter that creates an entity that says, okay, look, we spent all this money, I think if we had something like that, we wouldn't be tearing down a fire station with a brand-new roof. We would be looking at stuff like that, saying, hey, we just put a new roof on this. So,
I agree, I agree, Bill, with what everybody is saying, but I think also it would help the department. The department would be able to set up a spreadsheet just like Bill has, and then I would think that all of the people in the department, as well as the director or whoever runs that department, it would keep them abreast of what's going on as well. So, and then if some new person came in, if somebody leaves our town, it's right there. So if, hopefully, David doesn't leave us for another 30 years, David Gould, but if he does, the new person who comes in has that opportunity right in front of them to see what's been voted on, what's been worked on, what still needs to be done. So I think it would be great ongoing for every department to keep that kind of information, not just for town meeting, which is important, but also for the department itself.
Okay. So let's see, why don't we take a break and move to public comment for,
Bill, before you do that, could I add one thing? I've been looking for something and I finally found it. I couldn't remember which town it was. I looked at a lot of charters, just looked at them and they weren't my charters. But may I read you quickly from the Arlington Charter? It says that the FinCom reviews each department's budget in detail and holds hearings on town meeting appropriation articles in conjunction with the town manager, et cetera. So I sent this to Bill Abbott, and he can send it to all of us, but I just wanted to put it in public, out to the public, that the Arlington Finance Committee, it appears to me, only looks at finance. And they have 21 members, one from each precinct, and these are appointed not just by the moderator, but by the moderator, the chair of the FinCom, and the chair of the Board of Trust Fund Commissioners. So it doesn't have to be just the moderator, but The FinCom for Arlington only looks at budgetary items. Thank you.
Right. Betsy, what did you say? The FinCom Arlington just looks at finance? That was your conclusion, right? Yep, that's true.
I sent you a picture of that page, and you can share it with the rest of the commissioners.
Okay. And now we will turn to public comment, being 8:30. Who would like to address the Anatol Zuckerman? Floor is yours. Well, I think, Joe, I think Anatol's coming up.
Anatol Zuckerman, One Shinglewood, Plymouth. Good evening. Can you hear me? This 5-minute speech is a compilation of my 5 years long work with Plymouth administration and community. Current conditions. First, Plymouth Town Meeting is supposed to represent the original democracy of America, but it's run by a single man for the past 31 years. The moderator alone decides who may speak at the meeting, regardless of the importance of the issue at hand. 135 members of the meeting, who convened only twice per year, cannot evaluate the minute details of the town's industry and must rely on the recommendations of various committees and boards of the town. 2, a sole Plymouth town manager cannot manage the rapid growth of the town. Its 65,000 residents and 124 square miles of territory require a large and coordinated body of experts, managers, or counselors. 3, Plymouth Select Board, Planning Board, and Advisory Finance Committee bargain with developers but don't plan for the future growth of the town and have not implemented the 7 master plans that were adopted by the town since 2004. 4, Plymouth Community Preservation Committee spends taxpayers' money to build a few small houses, but hasn't used a large amount of the town-owned land to build a truly affordable habitat. Meanwhile, 40B projects destroy natural environment but don't provide real affordability. 5, Plymouth Open Space Committee, Water Conservation Committee, and Energy Committee have no instrument to implement the Plymouth Climate Emergency Declaration in their respective fields. Meanwhile, the advancing ocean and hurricanes threaten to destroy Plymouth downtown. Solutions. It is my considered opinion of an experienced architect and city planner that Plymouth's governance cannot meet the current needs of the town and must be reformed in the following manner. First, substitute the town meeting with the Board of Managers. The board will consist of elected experts of the 7 major industries: healthcare, finance, jurisprudence, city planning, construction, environmental protection, and arts. Each industry will be represented by 3 managers. The total board of 21 managers will convene monthly, consider all proposed projects and petitions, produce a new master plan, and report to mayor. 2, replace Plymouth town manager with Plymouth mayor. The mayor will have the power to veto the decisions of the managers, and the managers will have the power of overriding the mayor's veto by a 2/3 majority of their votes. 3, establish a general public meeting that will convene 4 times per year and will hear all citizens who wish to speak about the municipal issues and present petitions to the Board of Managers without prior censorship and limitations. The city's departments will assist citizens in writing petitions. 4, establish the Affordable Housing Committee that will produce a 5-year plan and report to the Board of Managers and Mayor monthly in accordance with the new Plymouth Master Plan. 5, established an Environmental Preservation Committee that will report monthly to the Board of Managers and the Mayor in accordance with Plymouth Climate Emergency Declaration. Thank you. And I welcome
Thank you.
questions.
Would you give us that paper to, a copy, is it in our minutes? Okay. Okay, great, thank you.
Oh, you got copies, okay.
Thank you very much. We each got this? Thank you, Anatol. Do you have any questions, anybody, for Mr. Zuckman? Thank you. All right, excellent. So this will be put on our website. Yeah, all these, this will be on the website, one of our folders. Right, okay. I'm wondering if Frank wants to take on one of your items. Frank, do we have time to take up term limits?
Excuse me, Bill, I didn't know if you were going to go forward. May I read a public comment that came to me by email from one of our town meeting members?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is from Claire Montanari. She is the chairman of Precinct 4. She says she believes that if an unexpected resignation occurs for whatever reason, the next highest vote getter should fill that vacancy only till the next election. I would not want a person to take that vacancy by appointment, nor would I want a special election, because we need to try to keep expenses down whenever possible. And then she says this is only her opinion, not the opinion of her precinct. This is from Claire Montanari.
So Betsy, was this passed out tonight?
I just received this email, so I thought I would share it, but I'll forward it to you, Bill.
Oh, okay, right. That was from Claire Montanari?
Yes.
Right. Okay,
So,
thank you.
so Bill, as regarding term limits,
Term limits, this, I sent everybody Frank's email this afternoon, if you had a chance to look at it. This was his first item. Term
is that my
limits.
first item, really? Yeah, I just think that term limits are a basic good idea at all levels of government. It's very difficult to put them in place at the higher levels of government for a variety of reasons. But the more change we have, the more vitality we have on these boards and committees, the less complacency we have. And I think all those things happen when you have boards that, for a variety of reasons, don't change for years and years and years. Town meeting is just one. If you look at the planning board, they've essentially, until this recent election, have been basically the same for the last 15 years or so. And it was an important time in our town, those last 15 years. So I think moderate term limits, and I haven't looked into what they could actually be. I've just posted some ideas such as 2 5-year terms for a planning board member before they were required to take a few years off. 4 terms for a board of select person election before they're required to take a term off. Town meeting members as well. You know, I think we make too much of the experience that is required on all these boards. What it takes is passion. What it takes is, you know, commitment. I'm new to the planning board, but I think that I'm committed to making changes there, or at least bringing a fresh perspective, and so I think I can be effective, though I'm not the master of Robert's Rules of Orders or anything like that. I think I'm seeing some changes from what just paying attention to town meeting, that there's been some turnover there for a variety of reasons, but I just think it's a good idea overall, and I think it increases transparency It makes people, there's general belief, especially now, that our government is, status quo, that it's the haves and the have-nots, it's that people telling you what to do. And you can't make that argument once you're inside the gates, so to speak. And so anything that facilitates that, I'm in favor of.
Okay. So Frank, I see you had a sliding scale. For executive, the select board would be 4 3-year terms, and then they take 3 years off. And the planning board would be 2 5-year terms with 2 years off. So they
Yeah,
would get a
that's-
string of terms, and then there'd be a break.
In all honesty, I pulled that out of my hat. There may be some logical way to look at that. I just think that it's more important that no single board member, select board, planning board, other committees, stays there for an extended period of time, so that they become, set in their ways, or their perspective is, the change is good in government, and so.
Good comments? Every time this comes up, then the question is whether the voters, you're really taking it out of the voters' hands. The voters can decide when to remove somebody or not remove them or whatever. Do you think that's a valid counter-argument? It's the one that always comes up in the opposite side. David?
Well, like I said in an earlier meeting, it sounds kind of funny coming from someone who served 22 years. But by the same token, there are indications in other charters of a lapse. I forget which one it is. I'd have to look in my charters here, but one of them said 2 consecutive terms and then a break. And then you can run again for 2 consecutive terms. I think, just to modify a little bit what Frank said, I think 3 terms on the Board of Selectmen, that's 9 years, and then a break. And I can only speak to the Board of Selectmen. I can't speak to the Planning Board or anything like that, but I think some form of term limiting is appropriate. And how we work out the mechanics of that is subject to more
Right.
debate, but the idea of having a break appears in a lot of the charters.
Right, yep. I think, term limits are beginning more and more to think it makes sense. I mean, I think term limits, for example, for our Supreme Court, makes a lot of sense. And maybe we should be looking at them, term limits here in Plymouth. Bill? Wrestling?
Towards your taking it out of the voters' hands argument, I rarely see the public exercising that, because it's, that was the argument for conflict of interest. If there's a conflict of interest and you're paying attention and seeing where your town meeting representative voted on things he shouldn't have, then, you vote him out. They don't do it. And I think, it goes back to the apathy of our voters that.
This would certainly create a bit of a churn and
Yeah.
stirring up.
Yeah.
Town meeting members would serve 9 years, I guess, under Frank's proposal, and then they'd take a break.
Bill?
Okay? Frank,
Bill?
looks like it's got legs.
Well, can I stop? Bill?
Wait,
I
Bill.
say, yeah. It's got legs until Bill talks. I truly believe in the voter, that that this process of democracy requires participation. People can vote someone in. That's my term limits. My term limits are the electoral process.
Depend on the voters to make the
I default to the general population, to the voters. I believe that we have in the system term limits with the voters, excuse me, with the general public. I just can't warm up to the idea of introducing term limits. I feel it goes against what I feel the electoral process should have to give the voter some sense and some control. They control the circumstance.
term
If I start building in the term limits, by the way, you know, people serve in a capacity over a period of time, and they pick up an institutional knowledge. I have never looked and seen somebody sitting there at town meeting or on a board and saying, I may disagree with the person, but I never said like, well, gee, I wish they would just, you know, that there was some mechanism in place that this ended their involvement. I just feel nervous about that. I feel that the general public should have the ability to make the final call on whether or not that person serves in that capacity. I think that bringing their voting record and their conduct to the voters' attention during an election cycle is important. I know that it's very popular on a national level that term limits make a lot of sense because people get in there with big money and there's, you know,
But I
lots of
think
money
it's
involved in there.
different, when you're talking term limits for the Supreme Court, which is not elected.
Yeah, I'm not talking about this.
Appointed, right,
yeah.
so, no, I'm just saying
Yeah.
there's a difference if the voters are involved or not involved.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court, I was talking about like Congress and the Senate on a national level. They raise millions and millions and millions of dollars to run for these seats, and no one will challenge them because of the money. That is, you know, we need to deal with that. I think we have to deal with the big money on that level. But when you get down to a local level, you know, I'm apprehensive. I see what Frank is pointing out. I've been super frustrated that that there've been boards in this town that haven't changed their makeup in 5 or 10 or 15 years. But what happened on one board this spring, there was a 180. That the residents of Plymouth saw that the planning board was not really living up to their priorities. I think it was the Bump Rock Road issue that drew people out in large numbers and changed the face of the planning board for the first time in 15 years. So in the end, there is a system built in place if people conduct themselves in a way that requires removal from office. So,
Yep, through
I
you,
don't know,
Mr.
Bill.
Chairman.
15 years.
Just to your point, in a perfect world, I see where you're coming from. You know, that the voting populace has that right and should exercise it. I was so impressed with this town when it came to the planning board, because, you know, a lot of people contacted me, not because I live near the road, but because I'm involved, and said, what do we do with this? And I said, bring it to the public. You know, you could be the first time that someone said to a board in Plymouth, no, this is ridiculous. And, you know, I got a lot of grief from some of the members of the planning board because the Zoom meeting was packed. And I said to them, if we were doing Zoom and we had an issue, we'd pack town hall. We'd pack the selectmen's meeting. That's the sheerest form of democracy when GQ Public says, no, we don't like this, and we're going to gain our troops. I think in the sheerest form, that's great. But that was such the minority that I see in this town where, you know, and it's starting to turn. You know, I think people were watching that. And GQ Public said, wow, the public really had a voice there. And I think that that's changing, but I think that, you know, we're still getting 10% voters, so 10% of those people decide how long those people stay in those offices. That's my concern.
I know.
But
I'm just
that-
kind of.
You're using Brook Road as an example?
Yeah.
But then you had an example in your own neighborhood. Bump Rock, okay, that's the one I'm thinking of, right. Which
Bill?
wouldn't have happened if it had been a live meeting.
I think.
Yes.
Bill? Yes, I do think this is something for future discussion. I think that when we, you know, have all of our members here, we should talk about it again. I understand all of the different arguments, and I see merit in all of the different methods. And I think what we really have to do is look at both the positives and the negatives for each proposal and say, what is going to serve the residents of Plymouth the best? So I think that we can discuss it in the future, but one thing I want to bring up is town meeting. I'm not sure that we should have I don't know if we should have term limits for town meeting, but I do know that some precincts struggle to get 9 members right now. And if they were term limits, then that might adversely affect a precinct.
Betsy, was that a general comment or specifically to one of our agenda items? I couldn't,
That was about term limits, I'm sorry. That was about term limits
town meeting,
for town meeting members only, yes.
okay.
Not necessarily, I'm thinking that when we look at term limits, we would not be
Oh,
looking
term
at
limits, right, yeah.
all elected officials.
Right. All right, so we have a few minutes. I'd like to spend a couple minutes setting our schedule. So we've been jumping around for the past couple months for meeting dates. And Michelle, you chime in here and help us, but the next meeting, we've been meeting on Mondays because there wasn't any conflict. And Mondays still look pretty promising because it
So
doesn't.
we're going to stay with Mondays, not go back to Thursdays? I was hoping at some point we'd go back to Thursdays, but,
Well, but you got the precinct chairs every third Thursday.
yeah.
So the next few meetings are proposed to be next Monday, the 1st of November,
Okay.
and then 2 weeks later, on the 15th of November, again, it's a Monday. And then 2 weeks later, the 29th of November, they seem to all work, those 3 Mondays in a row. And then I think the next one, Michelle, we talked about was the 13th of December, is that right? Which is also a Monday. So we were concentrating on Mondays, and I understand that the planning board is staying with Tuesdays, right? And the selectmen are concerned now that they're meeting on the same night as the planning board, and they mentioned Monday at their last meeting, but Monday wasn't attractive to them, so they may go to Wednesdays, but looks like Mondays are still working out okay for us. Unless you want to make a radical change. But anytime we suggest meeting on the third Thursday.
Yeah, no, I get that. I
And
just
then
have
I
a,
think the second
I have a
Thursday, or the
personal
first
conflict,
Thursday
but that's
is the
just-
building committee?
No, the building committee is on a Thursday, the committee of precinct chairs does Thursday, and don't forget, you always have the FinCom who, as town meeting starts to heat up, they start
Right.
grabbing Thursdays
So I
as a
don't-
backup
Monday
plan.
seems to be working out okay. The reason the selectmen don't like Monday, they don't want to read, according to what they said, they don't want to have to do their homework on Sundays.
heaven forbid.
But I think unless there's objection, we would stick with these Mondays.
That's an interesting, the argument that the planning board department has utilized for going to Monday is that they have staff. The staff is in the office on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then there's Friday. Friday, you come in at 8:30 and you leave at noon. That's not enough time to prepare all the documents that they need to get to their planning board in time for their meeting. So they like to have that Monday to get ready for the Tuesday meeting. So this brings this theory that I have, and that is about hours of operation. Now,
Randy Parker would be.
sometimes I get to town hall in the middle of the day, I'm running around doing my stuff, and then I want to get to town hall because I got to get something for the community preservation committee, and I'm going down to the office and grabbing something. And I usually, it's around lunchtime that if I stop by, I'm stop by in that time frame. On Fridays, it's very interesting, because I'll get in here before 11:30, and I'll go to the CPC mailbox, and I might go down to their office, and I might be patting my way out, and I run into the janitors, and there's pounding on the doors. To this day, every Friday, people are like, why is the doors closed? So this idea of having, going to work until noon at town hall and the rest of the day, there are people that are coming here that want to do business that can't. And I know the argument that was made, well, let's have these hours where we come in at 8:30 so people commuting out of town can come in early, and then, we'll stay late on a Tuesday.
Right,
and then-
the argument was the Tuesday late.
Yeah, and then I've talked to department people, and they're like, we've never had anybody come down to us after 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. So there's these hours of operation.
That's another
When-
agenda
when-
item, Bill.
Yeah, when this came up,
And it's a union negotiation.
when this came up at town meeting, we once had the power of deciding it. And then
Right.
later
Andy
on.
Parker tried to bring it up.
Yeah, and then it was determined that the town meeting didn't have the power to do this. But there've been about 5 or 6 or 7 years that have passed, and the technology's changing around how people do business with the town in terms of online and offline. And even with in town employees, in terms of union negotiations and contracts and times of work, we should be opening up flex hours where people can come in at an early hour and leave in the afternoon. Someone comes in later and works later in the day, as long as they're doing their 40 hours a week and their doors open at an appropriate time. We can put it on another time, but it just came up when people were talking.
You'd have to go through Dale
You
Weber.
know what? You need a puppy.
What was that?
You need a puppy.
Bill, may I say something?
Yes,
Bill?
Well, let me have a puppy.
Bill, Abbott, may I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
The Mondays are fine for me, I hope they can work for everyone. So the schedule is fine for me, but I would like to add an agenda item, and maybe nobody else will agree with me, but I've been disturbed that the zoning board, the planning board, and as far as I was told, the zoning board, the selectmen, and the planning board were meeting all on the same night. And I think it would be reasonable to establish in the charter what night the selectmen meet, what night the planning board meets, and what night the zoning board meets. And when someone runs for that position, they know that selectmen is Monday night or Tuesday night, whatever is chosen. And certainly we would consult with those boards. And I don't know if the charter could even do that, but I think it's that we need to be able to see our meetings on TV.
That'll be an agenda
and we
item,
can't if there are three.
one of our next agendas.
Yeah, so if you would add that as an agenda item, I would
So
appreciate
we
it.
finished, as far as the meetings go, though, we're set through December. The 13th would be the last meeting in December, and then I would suggest we start on the 2nd of January, which is a Monday. Or actually, must be the 3rd of January, which would be a Monday, because January 1st is a Saturday. Okay, so, Michelle, do you have any problems with the Monday meetings? Monday's okay with you, too? All right, good.
We go back to
Do we
Thursday.
have any
check the calendar?
new or old business? We're approaching our final hour here.
You
Motion
want
to
a motion-
adjourn.
Wait a minute, you want a motion on the minutes?
Yep, go ahead. Minutes of September 20th? any
Yes. I've read
corrections?
through them, I didn't see anything that leapt out at me, so I'm comfortable moving them, if you people want to vote on them.
Yes.
I would second.
Second it. Yeah, I'd like to commend Michelle because they're extraordinary minutes.
Yes.
I thought,
yeah,
really, really well detailed, a lot of good content. Thank you. So all in favor of any corrections to the minutes of the 20th? No? All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes of September 20th?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Being 9 o'clock,
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you for letting me sneak that in.